Before I start making my key points, I would like to thank many of you in the room for what I think have been good partnerships and projects in the past, and many of them have actually been very much related to building resilience. Just to give you a few examples, we have worked with the National Planning Commission in 2009 in Syria to work on a climate change adaptation strategy back in the days when Abdallah was still the Deputy Prime Minister in Syria. We have been working with IFPRI quite a lot. In fact, a lot of the things that I will be talking about will come out of this project, decreasing vulnerability to conflict in the Arab world. And we have also worked with other organizations like IFPRI, for example, on food subsidies, malnutrition in Egypt, and of course, many others. With that, let me say that my basic talking points come from a brief, which you should all have in your sleeves. It's also based on a broader background paper, which you can find on the website. And there are several authors involved, and some of them are in the room. Please take a look if you have time. It's called Building Resilience to Conflict Through Food Security Policies and Programs. Okay, I would like to use my time to talk about three things, basically. The first point is on the causes and drivers of conflict in the Arab world specifically. Then, as Abdallah has said, we'll try to come up with a definition of resilience to conflict. Again, that's based on this brief. And then finally, what can countries and perhaps what can we all do here to improve resilience going forward? Now, as to the causes and drivers, if we look at the global level and the literature on conflict, we see that there are basically four key causes of conflict. It's poverty, it's unemployment, especially among young men, it's inequality, and it's poor governance. Now, we all see this in our region. We just heard yesterday from the Social Fund for Development in Yemen that actually there's a lot of unemployment in Yemen, and what happens, the militias and the sheikhs, they give 1,000 Yemeni riyal per fighter as a daily wage, and you can see somebody who's unemployed, it's very intuitive, is more likely to get engaged into conflict, especially if he gets paid for it. So these things certainly apply in our region too. However, there's an interesting finding from the paper, which actually shows that food insecurity is a key cause of conflict in the Arab world, and more so than in other parts of the world. And one of the explanations is that our region here, the Arab world, is highly dependent on food imports, and the large and vast share of the population are net food buyers. That means any global food price shocks translates relatively quickly at the national and household level and leads to food insecurity. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence for that too. Now, in the past, we have seen bread riots in Egypt. Even during the 2008 global food crisis, there were a lot of riots out there. So there's intuition, there's also research, and there are a lot of stories around that key message. Food insecurity is a key cause of conflict in the Arab world. Then let's talk briefly about the drivers. Quite often it's a combination of drivers. It's not just one thing that leads to conflict, but it's a combination. And some of the things that we have observed that drive conflict are price spikes, economic crises, diseases, natural disasters, and all of them reinforce each other. I want to give you again an example from Egypt. If you look at the graph for Egypt, malnutrition and also hunger calorie deficiency, you will see from 2005 on, there was a steady increase in food insecurity. So what happened on the way? It was a succession of crises. In 2005, there was the bird flu. In 2007-08, the global food crisis. Then in 2008-09, the global financial crisis. Then in end of 2010, another spike in global food prices, and then the revolution. And since then, the situation has dramatically deteriorated, and it continues to be challenging. So the message is, it's not only one driver, there are many drivers, and the combination of factors, and they reinforce each other. Now basically the key message from this is, the takeaway message is, we know that food insecurity and improving food insecurity is very important, not only from a humanitarian perspective, but also from an economic perspective. We knew that before. Now we can safely say it's also important for preventing, or at least contributing to preventing conflict. And that's particularly true in the Arab world. Now let me come to a definition which we came up based on a previous 2020 consultative process. We have adapted that to conflict, and I will just read it to you, and then we can discuss a little bit more during the discussion. So building resilience, according to this definition, means helping countries and households to prevent, anticipate, prepare for, cope with, and recover from conflicts, and not only bounce back to where they were before the conflicts occurred, but even become better off after the conflict. Now, let me come to my final 3 points. What can countries and what can we do to improve food security and thus contribute to reducing the risk of conflict? Basically, we can think of 3 broad areas. There are policies, projects, and there are also information systems. We have heard from Khalida quite a bit about projects. You will see a lot of that in the paper. I think we will hear a lot from WFP on the food policy, food subsidy kind of issue. And I will mainly focus on the information thing. But 2 examples, country examples that I know is Yemen. We have a few colleagues here in the room too. Yemen has managed to come up with a national food security strategy. There is an institutionalization process going on, and we think that if this strategy is implemented, that will help bringing people away from taking up arms and bring them in safer jobs and become more food secure. Example of Egypt is a policy issue, and if you look at the definition of conflict and resilience, we are talking about countries and people should become even better off. So one of the issues in Egypt, and we will talk about more later, is the food subsidy and how to transfer from a subsidy-based system to a more broad-based social safety net, which can enhance resilience and can be quickly scaled up in times of conflict and crisis. And then finally, I think, and we all the authors think in this paper, we don't have enough information. A lot of the shocks that we were describing, food price shocks, droughts, global crises have come as a surprise. And countries didn't have enough time, or they were too slow to actually respond to those crises, and thus potentially prevent upheavals and uprisings. And I know Abdallah has a lot of stories to tell about from firsthand about this. But so my key message, final message is building on the good collaboration that we already have, internationals and nationals in the region. I think we should work hard, country level capacity building for decent resilience information systems, and that I think could be a very important contribution. Thank you.